Welcome, everyone. As the night settles in, let's drift together into the pages of time, unfolding another story from the past. Perhaps you're already lying in bed, chilling and getting relaxed, or simply letting history keep you company before sleep. Where are you listening from tonight? I'd love to know the place and hour of yours as these words reach you. And if these gentle tales of lives long ago bring you comfort and rest, I'd be honored to have you stay with me by subscribing to this channel. So, here's the story. The Queen of Dust and Despair, the Lamia's Lament. The Gilded Throne of Libya. The sun over ancient Libya was not a gentle benefactor. It was a tyrant of light, a blazing orb that hammered the white marble of the royal city of Cyrene into a dazzling, blinding spectacle. From the heart of this radiant city, the palace spires pierced the cerulean dome of the sky, their peaks sheathed in beaten gold that caught the sun's fire and cast it back in defiance. Within the cool, cavernous throne room, the air smelled of crushed mint, sandalwood, and the faint, metallic scent of water coaxed from deep aquifers to feed the lush hanging gardens. Here, upon a throne carved from a single block of obsidian, sat Queen Lamia. Her beauty was not a gentle thing either. It held a power comparable to the desert sun. Her hair, a cascade of obsidian curls, was interwoven with threads of gold and lapis lazuli. Her eyes, the color of rich, dark honey, missed nothing. They surveyed her court. The diplomats from Athens with their clever, shifting words, the merchants from Phoenicia with their hands stained purple from the murex shell, the tribal chieftains from the deep desert whose loyalty was us shifting us the sands. A young handmaiden, barely more than a child, trembled while pouring wine into a golden crater. The goblet she served to a portly merchant slipped, a single drop of dark red wine staining his pristine white chiton. His face flushed with immediate anger. Before he could speak a word of reprimand, Lamia's voice cut through the murmuring hall, smooth and resonant like polished stone. The heat of our Libyan sun can make even gold slippery, friend from Tyre. It is a small thing. Let it be a reminder that perfection is the domain of the gods, not of men. Her tone was light, yet it carried the weight of finality. She gestured, and the girl, with a look of profound gratitude, vanished into the shadows of a pillar. Lamia's justice was swift, but it was often tempered with a mercy that made her people adore her. She ruled not just through lineage, but through a keen intelligence and an empathy that felt the tremors of fear in her youngest subject. Later, in her private chambers, the facade of the untouchable queen softened. The room was open to the evening, the gauzy linen curtains billowing in the breeze that carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Here, her children found her. 2 boys, strong-limbed and boisterous, tumbled at her feet, their laughter echoing like bells. Her daughter, a serene girl with her mother's honey-gold eyes, sat quietly stringing pearls onto a silver thread. Lamia ran her fingers through her daughter's hair, her heart a vessel filled to overflowing. This was her true kingdom, this circle of love and laughter. It was a sanctuary, a world away from the political machinations of the court. She looked at their faces, each one a perfect, beloved masterpiece, and she felt a fierce, primal love that was both her greatest strength and, though she did not know it, her most profound vulnerability. As the stars, the cold, distant eyes of the gods, began to pepper the velvet sky, she felt a presence, a charge in the air, similar to the moment before a summer storm. It was a feeling she had come to recognize, a mixture of thrill and trepidation. Zeus, the cloud-gatherer, was near. The shadow of the cloud-gatherer. The affair did not begin with a thunderclap, but with a whisper of change in the air. It started in dreams. Lamia would find herself walking in a landscape of impossible beauty, where rivers flowed with wine and trees bore gems instead of fruit. A figure would be there, indistinct at first, but his presence filled the dreamscape, making the very air hum with potential. When he first appeared to her in the waking world, it was not in his divine splendor, which would have incinerated a mortal. He came disguised, a traveling philosopher, a foreign king, a simple shepherd. Yet his eyes gave him away. They were the color of a stormy sky, and within their depths lightning flickered. Their first true meeting happened in the royal gardens, under the ancient, gnarled boughs of an olive tree sacred to the city's founding nymph. He appeared as a tall stranger, his features noble, his cloak simple, but of a fabric that seemed to weave starlight into its threads. "Your Majesty," he had said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her very bones. "Your fame has reached even the remote villages of Arcadia. They speak of a queen whose wisdom rivals Athena and whose beauty challenges Aphrodite." Lamia, accustomed to flattery, had been wary. "And do the villagers of Arcadia often send emissaries with eyes that hold lightning?" she replied, a challenge in her tone. A smile touched his lips, a genuine expression of delight. In that moment, the disguise fell away, not in form, but in essence. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and the immense, silent pressure of divinity. She felt it then, not fear, but a terrifying, exhilarating awe. This was Zeus, father of gods and men. To be chosen by him was an honor that could level cities, a dangerous, glorious fate. He did not command, he seduced. He spoke to her not as a subject, but as an equal, admiring her mind, her strength, her rule. He found in her not just a beautiful vessel, but a companion. For Lamia, isolated by her crown, to be seen and understood by such a being was a potent intoxication. Their trysts were secret, shielded by the god's own power. They met in hidden desert oases, where the water was sweet and the moon was their only witness. They met in a secluded villa by the sea, where the roar of the waves masked their whispers. He spoke of the cosmos, of the follies of his fellow gods, of his wife Hera's bitter jealousy. "She is a storm that never breaks, a winter that never thaws," he confessed once, a rare vulnerability in his divine countenance. Lamia, in turn, spoke of her fears for her kingdom, her hopes for her children, the weight of the crown. In these moments, she was not a queen consorting with a god. She was a woman, cherished and listened to by a powerful, flawed, and endlessly fascinating being. She knew the risk. She knew the stories of Io, driven mad and transformed into a cow, of Callisto turned into a bear. But her love for her children was her anchor, and the love she felt from Zeus felt like a shield. It was a fragile hope, a beautiful, doomed delusion. The unblinking eye of heaven. Hera, queen of Olympus, was the embodiment of sacred marriage. Her domain was the hearth, the family, the vows sworn before the gods. And her husband, Zeus, made a mockery of it all. While he dallied with nymphs and mortals, she maintained the perfect order of the heavens, her rage a cold, compacted thing, burning hotter than any mortal fire. "She is a storm that never breaks, a winter that never thaws," he confessed once, a rare vulnerability in his divine countenance. Lamia, in turn, spoke of her fears for her kingdom, her hopes for her children, the weight of the crown. In these moments, she was not a queen consorting with a god. She was a woman, cherished and listened to by a powerful, flawed, and endlessly fascinating being. She knew the risk. She knew the stories of Io, driven mad and transformed into a cow, of Callisto turned into a bear. But her love for her children was her anchor, and the love she felt from Zeus felt like a shield. It was a fragile hope, a beautiful, doomed delusion. The unblinking eye of heaven. She had learned of the Libyan queen not from the gossip of lesser gods, but from the silence. Zeus's absences from Olympus had become more frequent, his excuses more elaborate. The very winds carried the scent of desert jasmine and mortal pride to her throne. She decided to see this paragon for herself. Descending from Olympus, she stood, invisible, in Lamia's throne room. She watched the queen dispense justice with a sharp mind and a surprising compassion. She saw the way her people looked at her, not just with respect, but with genuine love. This was no simpering nymph. This was a ruler, a mother, a woman of substance. The insult was far greater than any physical infidelity. Zeus had not just taken a lover, he had found a partner. The seed of Hera's wrath, already sown in the fertile soil of 1,000 betrayals, sprouted into a venomous, chilling hatred. It was not enough to punish Lamia, she had to erase her. Her vengeance was not a lightning strike, but a creeping frost. First, a blight fell upon Libya. The winter rains did not come. The earth, once fertile, cracked open in deep, thirsty gasps. The Nile's flood, upon which the kingdom's grain depended, was meager and anemic. The people began to murmur. Then sickness walked the streets of Cyrene. A strange fever took the old and the young, a coughing sickness that filled the lungs with fluid. The priests sacrificed white bulls and offered hymns to Apollo the healer, but the gods were silent. The people looked to their queen, and for the first time, Lamia saw doubt in their eyes. She spent her days in the temple, her nights by the bedsides of the sick, her robes stained with ash and sweat. She felt the fabric of her kingdom fraying, and a cold dread settled in her heart. She knew, with a certainty that turned her blood to ice, that this was no natural misfortune. This was a message. The eye of heaven was upon her, and it was an eye of pure, unadulterated malice. The harvest of sorrow. The day the world ended began with an unnatural stillness. The air in the palace was thick and heavy, suffocating. The usual sounds of the city, the distant bleating of goats, the chatter of merchants, the laughter of children, were absent. It was a silence that pressed against the ears. Lamia, her face drawn with fatigue from weeks of managing the crises, felt a primal fear clutch at her throat. She moved through the halls, her footsteps echoing in the eerie quiet, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She went to the nursery first. Her daughter's bed was empty, the linens tossed aside. A single, perfect pearl from her necklace lay on the floor, gleaming in the dim light. A strangled cry caught in Lamia's throat. She ran to her son's chamber. The two boys, who had been practicing with wooden swords just the evening before, were gone. Their room was in disarray, a small table overturned, a clay soldier shattered on the tiles. The air smelled wrong. It carried the faint, sweet scent of ambrosia, the food of the gods, a scent that was now a perfume of pure horror. She stumbled through the palace, her cries growing louder, more desperate. Lysandra, Alexios, Demetrius. Their names became a mantra of agony. Her guards and servants watched her, their faces masks of pity and terror. She found them in the great courtyard by the dry fountain. They were laid out side by side, her beautiful children. Their skin was pale, too pale. Their eyes, once so full of life, were closed. They were not sleeping. The life, the brilliant, sparkling energy that had defined them, was gone, extinguished. Lamia fell to her knees, the rough stone tearing at her skin. She gathered her daughter into her arms, then her sons, rocking back and forth, a low animal moan tearing from her lips. The world narrowed to this single point of absolute, unimaginable pain. The sun continued to shine, the marble continued to gleam, and the world, in its infinite cruelty, went on. But her world, the only one that had ever truly mattered, had ceased to exist. The grief was a physical force, a shattering of the soul. It was in this moment of absolute desolation that a figure appeared at the edge of the courtyard, shimmering with a terrible, majestic light. Hera had come to witness her harvest. The curse of a broken heart. Hera stood, radiating a cold, impeccable beauty. She was clad in a peplos of pure white, her hair coiled in an intricate style beneath a simple golden diadem. Her expression was not one of rage, but of serene, absolute satisfaction. She looked down at the broken queen, cradling her dead children, and her lips curved into a faint, chilling smile. "She took everything from me," Lamia whispered, her voice raw and broken, her eyes blind with tears. "Why, my children?" "They were innocent. You took what was mine." Hera's voice was calm, melodic, and utterly without mercy. "You welcomed the embrace of my husband. You warmed your bed with a fire stolen from my hearth. Did you think there would be no cost? A mortal queen believing herself the equal of a goddess?" Lamia looked up, and for a moment her grief was eclipsed by a surge of pure, undiluted hatred. "Kill me then, strike me down, but my children, give them back, I beg you, take my life for theirs." Hera laughed, a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "Death, that is a mercy, Lamia of Libya, a release. You will not have it. You will live. You will live with this pain, this emptiness for all your days. You wished to be a mother? Then I shall make you a mother for all eternity." She raised her hand, not in a violent gesture, but with the slow, deliberate grace of a sculptor shaping clay. The air around Lamia began to warp and shimmer. A terrible pressure built inside her skull, behind her eyes. "I curse you, Lamia. The memory of your children's faces will be etched behind your eyes, so you may never close them without seeing them. You will never know sleep's relief. You will be a sentinel to your own sorrow." A searing pain shot through Lamia's body. She felt her spine contort, her limbs lengthen and change. Her smooth skin grew tough and scaly. Her elegant fingers curled, her nails hardening into sharp obsidian claws. "And this beauty," Hera continued, her voice dripping with contempt, "this weapon you used to steal a god's affection, it shall become a tool for a new purpose. You will forever bear the mark of the serpent, the betrayer. You will be a creature of the dark, a thing of nightmares. And the children of others, they will be a constant reminder of what you lost. You will hunger for them, not with a mother's love, but with a monster's craving. The transformation was complete. Where the beautiful Queen of Libya had knelt, now crouched a horrific hybrid. A woman's torso and head, her face still bearing the ghost of its former beauty, now twisted with agony and rage, set upon the long, coiling body of a giant serpent. Her honey-colored eyes were now a piercing reptilian yellow, slit with black, and they could not close. The images of her dead children were forever burned into her retinas. Now, Hera said, her form beginning to fade, go. Be the monster you were always destined to be. The goddess vanished, leaving the creature that was once Lamia alone in the courtyard, surrounded by the silent, still forms of her children, her new forked tongue tasting the dust of her own despair. The exile of flesh and stone. The world had become a distorted painting, its colors too bright, its lines too sharp. Lamia's new eyes, which could not blink, drank in the horror of the courtyard with a relentless, unending clarity. The bodies of her children, her Lysandra, her Alexios, her Demetrius, lay where she had left them. Their stillness was a scream in the silent air. She tried to crawl towards them, but her body was a foreign instrument of torment. The great muscular coil of her serpentine lower half dragged heavily across the sun-warmed tiles, its scales a dull, coppery green in the light, scraping and slithering in a rhythm that was both alien and abhorrent to her. Her human hands, now tipped with those cruel black claws, dug into the cracks between the stones, pulling her forward. The movement was an ungainly, lurching struggle, a grotesque parody of the graceful stride that had once commanded a kingdom. She reached her daughter first. Lysandra's face was a perfect, pale oval, framed by soft brown curls. A tiny fly buzzed, landing on the child's unmoving cheek. A sound ripped from Lamia's throat, a hissing, guttural Qeen that was neither human nor beast. She reached out a trembling hand to brush the fly away, but her claw, sharp and unforgiving, nicked the perfect skin, leaving a faint red line. She recoiled in horror, her whole body convulsing. She was a defilement. Her very touch was a poison. The love that swelled in her heart, a love so vast it threatened to crack the very foundations of her being, had no pure outlet. It was trapped within a vessel of monstrosity. The palace guards found her there. They had heard the terrible sounds and approached with cautious spears and wide, terrified eyes. When they saw the creature hunched over the dead princess, their fear turned to a furious, superstitious rage. "Demon!" one of them shouted, his voice cracking. "It has slain the royal children!" They did not see their queen. They saw only the monster Hera had made. Spears were leveled. Lamia, her mind a cauldron of grief and instinct, reacted. Her new body possessed a speed her old one never had. She uncoiled with a violent lash, her powerful tail sweeping the legs from under the first two guards. They fell with cries of shock and pain. Her claws raked the air, slicing through a leather shield as if it were parchment. The sight of their blood, bright and hot, ignited a new, terrifying hunger in the pit of her being. It was a raw, physical need that for a single blinding moment overshadowed the emotional agony. Shocked by the impulse, she froze. The remaining guards seized their chance and pressed forward, their spears pricking her scaly hide. She could not stay. This was no longer her home. With a final, agonized look at her children, she turned and fled. She moved with a terrifying, sinuous speed, her body propelling her through the familiar halls that now felt like a tomb. Servants screamed and scrambled out of her path. She burst from a side entrance, out into the blinding Libyan sun, and did not stop. She moved away from the cultivated lands, away from the scent of jasmine and the sound of human life, towards the desolate places, the domain of rock and scorpion and sun-bleached bone. The gilded palace of Cyrene, the only home she had ever known, shrank behind her, a beautiful lie shimmering in the heat haze. She was leaving a ghost to become a legend of terror. The first hunger. The desert at night was a different world, a kingdom of cold silver and deep velvety black. The heat of the day fled, leaving a chill that seeped into the bones. A cold Lamia felt even through her thick scales. She had found refuge in a shallow cave, little more than a scar in the face of a windswept cliff. The rock walls were cold against her back. She was alone with the ceaseless, scratching sound of the wind and the relentless, waking nightmare of her own memories. Her eyes, forever open, projected the images of her children's faces onto the dark canvas of the cave. Lysandra's smile, Alexios's mischievous grin, Demetrius's serious, thoughtful gaze. They played out in an endless, torturous loop. She could not escape them. Sleep, the gentle healer of mortal wounds, was forbidding to her. Days bled into one another. The sun was a torment, the moon a cold, mocking eye. The hunger began. It started as a dull ache, a hollow feeling deep within her transformed body. But it quickly grew into a ravenous, gnawing thing, a fire in her gut. Her thoughts, which had been a swirling maelstrom of grief and rage, began to simplify, sharpening to a single, primal point: sustenance. Her forked tongue, a constant flickering presence, tasted the air. It brought her the scent of a desert hare, of a nesting bird, of a lone, spiny lizard. She tried. Driven by the pain in her belly, she hunted a plump hare, striking with a speed that surprised even her. She caught it, the small, warm body fragile in her grasp. But when she brought it to her mouth, the scent of its fur, the feel of its blood, revolted her. It was not what she needed. It was not what would quiet the screaming void inside her. It was on the fifth night, driven to the very edge of the desert where it met a small, impoverished village, that she understood. She was coiled in the shadows of a rocky outcrop, overlooking a cluster of mud brick houses. The hunger was a sharp, twisting knife in her guts. A woman emerged from one of the huts, singing a soft, off-key lullaby to the babe in her arms. The sound, the sight, sent a jolt through Lamia's entire being. The memory of her own children, the ghostly sensation of their small, warm bodies against her own, flooded her. The hollow ache in her stomach seemed to align perfectly with the hollow ache in her soul. The woman went back inside, but left the sleeping child in a simple crib near the doorway to enjoy the cool night air. Lamia watched, mesmerized. The child, so small, so vulnerable, so full of life. A life she had lost, a life she could take. The thought did not horrify her. In her starved, grief-maddened state, it felt like logic. It felt like justice. If she could not have her own children, why should any other mother? If her own life was eternal torment, why should their joy be eternal? And beneath the rage and the grief, the curse woven by Hera pulsed like a dark star, twisting her maternal instincts into something predatory and vile. She moved. She was a shadow, a whisper of scales over dust. She was at the crib in moments. The child slept peacefully, its chest rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. Lamia's clawed hands hovered over it. Her breath hitched. For a moment, the ghost of the queen she had been surfaced, screaming in revulsion. But the hunger and the curse were louder. Her jaws unhinged with a soft, sickening pop. The world narrowed to the beating heart of the infant. She struck. The act was swift. The aftermath was an eternity. The warmth of the life she had consumed spread through her, a temporary, shameful satiation. The gnawing hunger was silenced. The screaming grief was, for a few blessed hours, muffled. But as she slid back into the desolate darkness of the desert, a new feeling rose, cold and slick and more terrifying than any hunger. It was the taste of ash and self-loathing. She had done the unspeakable. She had become the monster Hera willed her to be. And the worst part, the part that would echo in the silent watches of the night, was that a part of her, a small, damned part, had found a moment of peace in the horror. The whispering god. The years blurred into a cyclical hell. Lamia became a creature of the wild, remote places. The high, lonely crags of the Atlas Mountains, the deep, lightless fissures of the Sahara, the forgotten tombs that dotted the coastline. She was a story mothers told their children to frighten them into obedience. Be good, or the Lamia will come for you in the night. Her name became a synonym for loss, for a grief so profound it could transform a person into a predator. She hunted, she fed the terrible hunger, and she endured the endless waking vision of her own dead children. Her once beautiful face, still recognizably human, was now a mask of perpetual anguish, etched with the tracks of tears that could never fully dry. It was in a dank, sea-sprayed cave on a remote island shore that a new presence announced itself. The air, which normally smelled of salt and decay, suddenly carried the fresh scent of ozone and a strange metallic sweetness. A light appeared, not the harsh light of the sun or the cold light of the moon, but a soft, golden radiance. From this light stepped a young man. He was impossibly handsome, with an ageless face and clever, laughing eyes. He wore a traveler's cloak, and a winged helm rested casually in the crook of his arm. In his hand he held a caduceus, two serpents entwined around a staff. Lamia, coiled in the darkest recess of the cave, hissed, baring her fangs. "Come to finish what your queen began, Olympian? Come then, my curse has left me with little left to lose." The god held up a placating hand. His voice, when he spoke, was smooth and melodic, capable of charming the birds from the trees or the secrets from the Sphinx. "Peace, Lamia of Libya. I am not here as an executioner. I am Hermes, psychopomp, messenger, and a friend to those in difficult situations." Lamia let out a harsh, barking laugh that held no humor. "A friend? The gods have shown me the quality of their friendship. Get out." "I cannot give you back your children," Hermes said, his tone shifting, becoming quieter, more serious. He took a cautious step closer. "Not even my father could undo what Hera has wrought. The fates themselves would recoil. Their souls are long gone, safe in the fields of Elysium, where no grief can touch them." The mention of her children in such a state, free from pain while she remained in hell, was a fresh torment. She recoiled as if struck. "Then you have nothing to offer me." "I offer you a different gift," Hermes said. He gestured with the caduceus, and the serpents seemed to writhe with a life of their own. "A respite. I cannot remove the curse, but I, the guide of souls, have some small influence over the veil between waking and sleeping. I can grant you, for brief periods, the ability to remove your own eyes." Lamia stared at him, her unblinking gaze filled with a torrent of suspicion and a desperate, fragile hope. "Remove my eyes?" When the weight of the memories becomes too great, when the faces of your children burn too brightly, you may take them from their sockets. In those moments, you will find a semblance of sleep, a darkness, a silence. It will not be true rest, but it will be a cessation of the endless seeing. It is a small thing, but it is all the mercy this world can offer you now. Tears, hot and stinging, finally welled in Lamia's cursed eyes. It was a kindness, a tiny, pathetic kindness in an ocean of suffering, but it was more than she had ever dreamed to receive. This was not the grand, destructive passion of Zeus, nor the absolute hatred of Hera. This was a sliver of compassion, a recognition of her agony. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why would you do this?" Hermes's face was unreadable, a blend of pity and divine pragmatism. "Even monsters deserve a moment of peace, Lamia, and the world has need of its monsters. They give shape to the fears of men. They make the heroes brave." He stepped forward and, with a touch as gentle as a butterfly's wing, pressed his fingers to her forehead. A complex knowledge flooded her mind, the understanding of how to perform this grisly self-surgery, a temporary relief from her eternal sentence. When she opened her eyes again, he was gone. The cave was dark once more, save for the faint silver of moonlight on water. But something had shifted. She was still a monster, still cursed, still alone. But she was no longer entirely without a choice. She had been given a key, however small, to a temporary prison of her own making. For the first time since her transformation, she felt emotion that was not grief, hunger, or rage. It was the faint, chilling spark of a plan. The Gorgon's shadow. The knowledge Hermes had imparted was a cold, surgical thing nestled in her mind. It was not a comfort, but a tool. Lamia retreated deeper into the wild, into the volcanic badlands where the earth itself seemed scarred and angry. Here she found a cave system that suited her new nature. A labyrinth of tunnels leading to a central chamber open to the sky through a fissure, allowing the moon to cast its pallid light upon a floor of polished obsidian. It was here she first practiced the god's grim gift. The process was an abomination. Her claws, designed for tearing flesh, had to become instruments of precise horror. The first attempt was a fumbling, agonizing failure. She scratched at her own face, hissing in pain and frustration, the images of her children swimming in a haze of blood and tears. But desperation was a relentless teacher. She learned the angle, the specific pressure needed to pop the ocular sphere from its socket without causing permanent damage. The curse would not allow anyway. The moment the eye came free, the world vanished. The relentless parade of memories ceased. It was not sleep, not truly. It was a void, a sensory deprivation so absolute it was at first terrifying. But after a lifetime of unending visual torment, the terror was a welcome trade. In that black silence, there was no Libya, no Zeus, no Hera, no dead children. There was only a vast, echoing nothingness. It was the closest she would ever come to peace. She began to hoard these moments of self-inflicted blindness, using them as a miser uses gold. She would endure the agony of her memories for days, weeks, until she felt her sanity fraying at the edges. Then she would retreat to her obsidian chamber and grant herself a few hours of precious darkness. During these blind periods, her other senses sharpened to a preternatural degree. She learned the geography of her cave by the whisper of air through different tunnels, the taste of minerals on the stone, the subtle vibrations in the ground. She was remaking herself, not as a queen, not even as the simple monster Hera had created, but as something else entirely, a creature of ritualized suffering and heightened instinct. It was during one of these blind periods that she first sensed she was not alone in the deeper tunnels. A presence, ancient and stony, resonated through the rock. It was a slow, rhythmic vibration, like a heartbeat measured in centuries. Curiosity, a feeling she thought long dead, stirred within her. When her sight was restored, she went searching. Deep in the lowest chamber, where the air was thick with the smell of sulfur and petrified damp, she found her. The Gorgon, Medusa. She was not a monster in the way Lamia was. Her lower half was that of a great, coiled serpent, but her upper body was that of a woman whose beauty had been frozen in a moment of divine punishment. Her hair was a horrific crown of living, hissing vipers, their tongues flickering in the gloom. But her face was turned away, buried in her arms. "I know you are there." Medusa's voice was a low, sibilant whisper, filled with a sorrow that mirrored Lamia's own. "I can hear the slide of your scales. You are new to this form." Lamia did not answer at first. She simply watched, this legendary horror, this woman whose gaze could turn men to stone, weeping in the dark. "They call me Lamia," she said finally, her own voice rough from disuse. Medusa did not turn. "They call me many things, none of them my name. Leave me, my curse is my own." "My eyes hold the faces of my dead children," Lamia said, the words coming unbidden. "I can never close them. A god taught me to take them out to find rest." A bitter laugh echoed through the chamber. "Hermes, he is fond of such practical mercies. He brought Perseus to me, you know, with a shield of polished bronze and a sword from our father. He gave me the gift of death." There was no gratitude in her tone, only a weary, bottomless grief. The two monstrous women sat in silence for a long time, each a testament to the petty, cruel vengeance of the gods. They did not offer each other comfort, for there was none to give. They did not become friends, for their pain was too all-consuming to allow for such a bond. But in that shared silence, in the recognition of a similar damnation, Lamia felt a minuscule shift. She was not the only one. Her suffering was unique in its details, but not in its kind. The world was full of such stories, woven by careless, immortal hands. The knowledge did not lessen her pain, but it draped it in a colder, more profound understanding. She was a single note in a symphony of suffering orchestrated by Olympus. She left Medusa to her tears, carrying this new, bleak wisdom back to her own chamber. The Gorgon's shadow had fallen upon her, and it was a shadow she would never escape. The hero's gaze. The decades turned, and Lamia's legend grew, a dark stain spreading on the map of the Mediterranean. She was no longer confined to Libya. Her hunger and her grief drove her across the sea, to the rocky coasts and verdant valleys of Greece itself, Hera's own backyard. It was a deliberate act of defiance, a serpent slithering into the garden of its tormentor. She took up residence in the thickly wooded mountains near a prosperous city-state, preying on the outlying villages. She became a problem that required a solution, And in the world of men, solutions had a name: heroes. His name was Corinthus. He was young, strong, and blessed by Apollo, or so the priests claimed. His hair was the color of wheat, his eyes a clear, confident blue. He had slain a giant boar that terrorized the farmlands, and driven off a band of marauding centaurs. The city fathers, desperate and grieving, promised him a fortune in gold and a statue in the agora if he could rid them of the child-eating demon. Lamia knew he was coming. The woods were her domain now, and they spoke to her. The alarm calls of birds, the sudden silence of the crickets, the scent of oiled leather and male sweat on the wind, all of it was a clear narrative of his approach. She watched him from the high branches of an ancient oak, her body perfectly still, her coppery scales blending with the bark. He moved with the arrogant grace of the untested, his sword held ready, his eyes scanning the forest floor. He was looking for a monster. He was not prepared for what he would find. She let him pass beneath her, then dropped silently behind him. "You seek Lamia?" she asked, her voice a low, melodic whisper that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. Corinthus spun around, his sword flashing. His eyes widened. He saw the woman first, the haunting, tragic beauty of her face, the cascade of dark hair, the pale, smooth skin of her torso. Then his gaze traveled downward, and he saw the great serpentine coil, the powerful muscles, the glint of her claws. His confidence wavered, replaced by a flicker of revulsion and something else, a faint, shameful pity. "Demon," he breathed, tightening his grip on his sword. "I have been called that," Lamia agreed, slithering closer in a slow, hypnotic circle. "But tell me, hero, what do you see when you look at me? Do you see a monster to be slain, or do you see a woman wronged?" "I see a murderer of children," Corinthus said, his voice gaining strength. "I see a blight that must be cleansed." "Hera murdered my children," Lamia's voice cracked, the raw pain breaking through her controlled tone. The images of Lysandra, Alexios, and Demetrius flared behind her eyes, bright and agonizing. "She took them from me because her husband found solace in my arms. Is a queen not allowed to love? Is a mother not allowed to grieve? She made me into this thing that hungers for what it has lost. Is that justice, son of Apollo?" She was close to him now, close enough for him to see the tears that welled in her unblinking eyes. He could see the profound, eternal sorrow etched there. He saw not a demon, but a soul in torment. His sword arm trembled. The simple narrative of good and evil that had brought him here was crumbling. I have my duty," he stammered. "Duty?" Lamia hissed, a flicker of her old royal authority returning. "I had a duty to my people, to my children. The gods care nothing for our duties, hero. They use us as playthings and punish us for their games." She raised a clawed hand, not to strike, but to gesture at her own face. "Look into my eyes. Truly look. Tell me what you see." Corinthus, against all his training, looked. He saw the beautiful, haunted face. And he, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, reflected in the depths of her pupils the ghostly, shimmering images of 3 children laughing and playing in a sun-drenched courtyard. The sight struck him with the force of a physical blow. This was not a mindless beast. This was a prison of memory and flesh. With a cry that was part frustration, part despair, Corinthus lowered his sword. "I cannot," he whispered. "By the gods, I cannot." Lamia watched him, her head tilted. The hunger in her belly growled, but a different, more complex emotion surfaced, a twisted sense of power. She had not defeated him with strength, but with truth. She had forced a hero to see the monstrous injustice of the world, and in doing so, she had disarmed him. "Go," she said, her voice flat. "Go back to your city. Tell them the monster is slain. Tell them you drove me into the sea. Build your legend on a lie. It is what men and gods do best." Shamefaced, broken not in body but in spirit, Corinthus turned and fled through the trees. Lamia watched him go. She had won. She had survived. But the victory tasted of ashes. She had shown her pain to a mortal and had used it as a weapon. She was learning. She was adapting. The beautiful Queen of Libya was truly dead. In her place stood a creature who understood that in a world ruled by capricious gods, the most potent power was not love or strength, but the strategic weaponization of a broken heart. The Siren's Cradle. The encounter with Corinthus changed Lamia. It revealed a new facet of her curse, the power to paralyze not with physical threat, but with the overwhelming weight of her tragedy. She began to use it consciously, refining it into a weapon more precise than her claws. She learned to modulate her voice, to let it carry the haunting melody of a lost lullaby, the whisper of a grieving mother. She would appear at the edge of villages not as a rampaging beast, but as a weeping wraith, her sorrowful song drifting through the night to lure the compassionate, the curious, or the simply foolish. It was on a jagged, storm-lashed coastline, in a cave that echoed with the boom of the surf, that she found another kindred damned spirit. The sirens were not solitary like her. They were a trio, sisters whose beautiful voices had lured countless sailors to their deaths on the rocks. Their cave was a gruesome treasury, littered with the bleached bones and waterlogged treasures of their victims. They were beautiful, with the lower bodies of great birds and sharp, intelligent eyes. When Lamia first entered their domain, they turned their lethal song upon her. The music was irresistible, a complex weave of promise and desire, meant to pull her into the treacherous waters. But Lamia was not a sailor yearning for home. Her desires were simpler, more terrible. The siren song found no purchase on a soul already consumed by a single fixed obsession. She simply listened, her unblinking gaze fixed on them, until their song faltered and died in the face of her silent, monumental grief. "You are immune," one of them said, her voice still holding a melodic, dangerous quality. "Your song offers things I can no longer want," Lamia replied. "You offer knowledge of all things. I already know everything I need to. You offer a safe return home. My home is dust and memory. You offer the fulfillment of desire. My only desire is an impossibility." The sirens looked at each other. They were accustomed to ensnaring men, not confronting another immortal tragedy. "What do you want here, Lamia?" another asked. "This is our shore." "I want nothing from you," Lamia said. "I am merely passing through. But I can offer you something, a new verse for your song." She then began to sing. It was not a beautiful sound, not in the way the sirens' music was. It was raw, a wordless keening that held the echo of a mother's lullaby twisted into a wail of loss. It was the sound of a nursery gone silent, of a cradle filled with dust. It was the antithesis of their music of temptation, It was a song of pure, unadulterated despair. The sirens listened, rapt. They were artists of emotion, and this was a new color for their palette. They saw the power in it, the power to paralyze with pity, to horrify with empathy. They began to weave her lament into their own deadly symphony, creating a harmony so heartbreakingly sad it could make a man lose all will to live, to simply let the waves take him out of shared sorrow. Lamia did not stay long with them. Their communal damnation was alien to her solitary one. But the alliance, brief though it was, marked another evolution. She was no longer just a victim or a predator. She was becoming a source of corruption, a teacher of despair. Her grief was a poison that could seep into other myths, other stories, amplifying the darkness in the world. As she left the sirens to their new, improved song, she felt a grim satisfaction. Hera had intended her curse to be a solitary punishment, but Lamia was learning to make her pain infectious, to spread her own private hell like a plague upon the world that had created it. Her legacy would not be just the children she took, but the hope she extinguished in the hearts of all who heard her story, or the echo of her cry in the siren's deadly melody. The Oracle's Price. The whispers of the earth spoke of a place where time itself pooled and thickened, where the veil between what is and what could be grew thin as a moth's wing. It was a place called Delphi, nestled on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, a place where the very air vibrated with the power of the god Apollo. The Pythia, his priestess, sat upon a tripod stool over a fissure in the rock, breathing in the chthonic vapors that rose from the earth, her voice becoming a conduit for the god's will. To this sacred place, kings and beggars alike journeyed, seeking answers, seeking a thread of certainty in the tangled loom of fate. Lamia came not as a supplicant, but as a thief in the night. She moved through the sacred groves of laurel and olive, her serpentine body a whisper against the ancient roots. The hunger was a constant companion, a dull drumbeat in her blood. But a new, more potent hunger had begun to gnaw at her, the hunger for an end. The memory of Hermes' small mercy had curdled over the decades. A few hours of blindness was a drop of water to a woman dying of thirst. She needed a river. She needed the Styx. She could not approach the temple by day. The place was thronged with pilgrims, guarded by priests, and saturated with the light of the far shooter, a god who would have no pity for a creature born of his stepmother's wrath. So she waited, coiled in a fissure of the Phadriades, the shining rocks that towered over the sanctuary. She watched the sun set, painting the marble temples in hues of fire and blood, and then she watched the moon rise, casting the world in silver and secret. When the sanctuary was silent, save for the rustle of the leaves and the distant howl of a wolf, she moved. She was a shadow flowing through the temple of Apollo's colonnades, past the omphalos, the navel of the world, a stone that marked the center of the cosmos. The air inside the Adaton, the inner sanctum, was thick and cloying, smelling of burnt laurel, incense, and something else, a sweet, sickly odor, like rotting honey, that she knew to be the pneuma, the breath of the earth Gaia, that the Pythia inhaled. The Pythia was an old woman, her body frail, her eyes clouded with age and visions. She was alone, washing a ceremonial bowl in a basin of holy water. She did not startle when Lamia entered. She simply looked up, her milky eyes seeming to see straight through the monstrous form, to the broken queen within. "You are not scheduled for a consultation," the Pythia said, her voice raspy yet calm. "The god does not appreciate being disturbed outside of his appointed hours." "I do not seek the god's wisdom," Lamia hissed, slithering closer. The chamber was small, the ceiling low. Her size seemed to fill the space. "I seek an end to his family's cruelty. Tell me, Oracle, is there a way to break my curse? Is there a death for me?" The Pythia set down the bowl. She did not seem afraid. She seemed weary. "The future is not a scroll to be read at will, creature. It is a river, and I am but a stone in its bed, feeling its currents. To ask such a question, you must pay the price." "I have nothing left to pay with," Lamia snarled, bitterness rising in her throat like bile. "My children, my kingdom, my very form, all have been taken." "The price is not yours to choose," the Pythia said. She gestured to the tripod stool. "Sit, breathe. The puma will show you what you need to see. But be warned, Lamia of Libya. You seek an end to sight, but the god's visions may show you things you can never unsee." Desperation overpowered caution. Lamia, with great difficulty, arranged her massive coils and lifted her human torso onto the sacred tripod. She leaned over the fissure. A faint, warm vapor rose from the crack in the earth. It smelled of stone, of roots, of something ancient and slumbering. She inhaled deeply. The world dissolved. It was not a vision of the future. It was a symphony of pain. She saw not with her eyes, but with her entire being. She felt the terror of every child she had ever taken, 1,000 tiny heartbeats stuttering into silence. She felt the grief of every mother who had wailed over an empty cradle, a grief that was a pale, echoing mirror of her own. She saw the legends that would spring from her torment, the vase paintings, the poems, the plays, each one twisting her story, making her a simpler, more bestial monster, erasing the queen, the mother, the victim. She saw her name becoming a byword for terror, her face a mask for nightmares. She saw the endless, lonely stretch of her own existence, a dark road with no destination. And then a single, clear image formed in the maelstrom, a blade, not a sword of hero or god, but a simple, ritualistic knife, its blade made of a strange, dark metal that seemed to drink the light. It lay on a simple stone altar in a grove of poplar trees, near a pool of perfectly still, black water. A voice, not the Pythias, not Apollo's, but something older and more elemental, whispered through the vapors. "The price of an end is a memory made flesh. To still the eternal heart, one must reclaim the stolen beat." The vision snapped. Lamia gasped, recoiling from the fissure. The chamber swam back into focus. The Pythia was watching her, her expression one of profound pity. "You see," the old woman whispered, "the god does not give answers. He gives riddles, and the price is the burden of having seen." Lamia slid from the tripod, her mind reeling. The vision of the children's terror was a fresh brand on her soul, worse than any memory Hera had imposed. But within that horror was a clue, a blade, a grove, a pool, a riddle. To still the eternal heart, one must reclaim the stolen eat. The vision snapped. Lamia gasped, recoiling from the fissure. The chamber swam back into focus. The Pythia was watching her, her expression one of profound pity. "You see," the old woman whispered, "the god does not give answers. He gives riddles, and the price is the burden of having seen." Lamia slid from the tripod, her mind reeling. The vision of the children's terror was a fresh brand on her soul, worse than any memory Hera had imposed. But within that horror was a clue, a blade, a grove, A pool, a riddle. To still the eternal heart, one must reclaim the stolen beat. It was a shred of hope, a thread in the labyrinth. She had paid for it with a new layer of torment, but she had paid it. She fled the temple, not with an answer, but with a destination. She had to find that grove. She had to find that blade. The oracle's price had been terrible, but the alternative, an eternity of the vision she had just witnessed, was unthinkable. The Grove of Forgetfulness. The vision from Delphi became her new obsession, a focal point for a mind that had known only diffuse and endless agony. The description, a grove of poplars, a still black pool, an altar of rough-hewn stone, echoed in the deep folkloric memory of the land. She wandered for years, a spectral figure haunting the wild places of Greece, questioning nymphs who fled from her, terrifying satyrs into giving her broken directions, and following the scent of stagnant water and sorrow. She found it, finally, in a forgotten valley in Arcadia, a place so secluded it seemed time had passed it by. The Grove of Forgetfulness was not a place of peace, but of silence. The poplar trees, with their leaves of dark green above and ghostly white below, did not rustle in the wind. Their whispers were of things best left unremembered. The air was cool and carried the dense, cloying scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. In the center of the grove was the pool, its water black and viscous, like a slab of polished obsidian. It reflected nothing, not the trees, not the sky, only a profound and empty darkness. And there, beside it, was the altar, a single, massive block of gray stone, moss clinging to its base. On it lay the knife. It was exactly as she had seen it. The blade was about the length of her forearm, forged from a metal that was neither iron nor bronze. It was a deep, non-reflective gray, like a storm cloud, and it seemed to absorb the faint light that filtered through the poplar canopy. The hilt was made of a yellowed, ancient bone, carved with spirals that made her dizzy to look at. This was no weapon for battle. It was a tool for a specific, sacred, and terrible purpose. As she approached, a figure emerged from the shadows between the trees. It was a man, or something like a man, but so old he seemed to be made of the same stuff as the grove itself. His skin was bark, his hair moss, his eyes the still, dark water of the pool. He was the genius loci, the spirit of this place. "You are not yet dead, Lamia." His voice was the sound of roots shifting deep underground. "This grove is for those who wish to drink from the pool of Lethe and forget their lives before they cross the final river. You are still bound to your pain." "I do not wish to forget," Lamia said, her gaze fixed on the knife. "I wish to end. The oracle sent me. The price of an end is a memory made flesh. What does it mean?" The old spirit shuffled towards the altar. "This blade is not meant for flesh and blood. It cannot harm a living thing. It is a psychopomp's tool, like the staff of Hermes. It severs connections. It cuts the threads that bind the soul to its story, to its curses, to its memories." He pointed a gnarled wooden finger at her. "Your curse is your story. Your immortality is tied to the memory of your children. Hera did not just make you a monster, she made your grief eternal. To reclaim the stolen beat, you must take it back. You must make the memory flesh, and then you must sever it." Lamia stared at him, a horrifying understanding dawning. "Make the memory flesh?" "The pool," the spirit said, gesturing to the dark water. "Gaze into it. It does not show your reflection. It shows the shape of your sorrow. It will give it form. But be warned, Queen of Libya. To give your grief a body is to face it, to hold it in your arms one last time. And then You must be the one to let it go forever. Trembling, Lamia moved to the edge of the black pool. She looked down. The water remained black, refusing to show her monstrous visage. Then it began to swirl. The darkness coalesced, shaped itself. It formed the image of her daughter, Lysandra, not as a ghost, but as a solid, tangible child, her eyes closed as if in peaceful sleep. Then Alexius appeared beside her, then Demetrius. They were perfect. They were her children, formed from the very essence of her loss. A sob racked Lamia's body. This was the memory made flesh. This was the stolen beat of her heart, given form. To hold them again, and then to use the knife. It was a cruelty that surpassed even Hera's imagination. It was the ultimate choice, to live forever with the ghost of her love, or to murder the manifestation of that love to find peace. She reached for the knife. The bone hilt was cold, deathly cold. It seemed to pulse in her hand with a rhythm that was the inverse of a heartbeat. She looked from the blade to the peaceful, sleeping forms of her children in the pool. The price of an end was not just a memory made flesh. It was a mother's hand raised against the final, perfect echo of her own children. The grove of forgetfulness held its breath, waiting for her decision. The weight of the blade. The knife was heavier than any weapon she had ever held, its weight metaphysical, a density of purpose that threatened to pull her to her knees. The cold from the bone hilt seeped up her arm, a chill that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the void it promised. She stood at the precipice of the black pool, her unblinking eyes fixed on the three perfect forms of her children suspended in the darkness. They were so real. She could see the gentle rise and fall of Lysandra's chest, the way a lock of Demetrius's hair fell across his forehead, the familiar, stubborn set of Alexius's jaw, even in sleep. To do this thing was to commit the ultimate act of desecration. It was to take the love that defined her, the love that had been weaponized against her, and annihilate it by her own hand. It was to become Hera's final, perfect instrument. The Queen of Heaven's curse would be complete not when Lamia suffered, but when Lamia herself agreed to extinguish the source of that suffering. It was a diabolical checkmate. Yet, the alternative was the vision from Delphi, an eternity not just of grief, but of being the source of grief for countless others, her legend a spreading stain, her existence a never-ending scream in the silent halls of time. The faces of the mothers she had bereaved flashed before her eyes, their agony now a part of her own. Could she endure millennia more of that? Could she bear to become not just a monster, but the very principle of monstrousness? Her claws tightened around the hilt. She focused not on the faces of her children, but on the memory of their laughter, the warmth of their hugs, the light in their eyes when she entered a room. Those were the things she was fighting for. She was not killing her children. They were long gone, safe in Elysium. She was killing the curse. She was killing the prison Hera had built from her love. She was reclaiming that love, even if the only way to do so was to perform this horrific, final sacrifice. With a cry that was part agony, part defiance, she raised the knife. It did not gleam. It seemed to pull the light from the air around it. She did not stab. The action was not one of violence, but of severance. She plunged the blade not into the forms in the water, but into the space between her and them, into the very tether of memory and curse that connected her to these phantoms. The effect was instantaneous and silent. The gray blade met no resistance, but she felt a snap, a fundamental breaking deep within her soul. A cord that had been pulled taut for a lifetime suddenly giving way. The three forms in the pool dissolved. They did not fade or wither, they simply unwound, unspooling into tendrils of black mist that were absorbed back into the water until the pool was once again a flat, featureless darkness. The silence that followed was absolute. Lamia stood, panting, the knife still clutched in her hand. She waited for the pain to vanish, for the curse to lift, for her monstrous form to fall away. It did not. She was still a serpent woman. Her eyes still could not blink. But something had changed. She looked inward, at the gallery of her memories. She, Lysandra, Alexios, and Demetrius. She, Lysandra them, playing in the courtyard. She felt the love, the fierce, protective love. But the agony was gone. The raw, screaming wound that Hera had carved into her psyche was healed. Scarred, but healed. The memories were now just that, memories. They no longer held her hostage. They no longer burned behind her eyes. For the first time since that day in the palace, she could think of her children and feel love without the accompanying tsunami of debilitating grief. She looked at the pool. She could close her eyes. She tentatively lowered her lids. Darkness. Sweet, blessed, voluntary darkness. She opened them again, tears of a different kind, tears of relief streaming down her face. The curse was not broken, but its power was severed. Hera's eternal punishment had been built on the foundation of her eternal grief. She had taken that foundation away. She laid the knife back on the altar. It was done. She had paid the oracle's price. She had reclaimed the stolen beat of her heart by sacrificing its tormented echo. She was free. Not free of her form, not free of her immortality, but free of the pain that made that immortality a hell. She was still Lamia. She was still a monster in the eyes of the world. But she was no longer Hera's victim. She was something new, something unknown. And for the first time in centuries, the future was not a terrifying, endless road of sorrow. It was a blank page. The echo in the empty hall. The silence in the grove of forgetfulness was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. Lamia remained there for a time she could not measure, days or perhaps weeks, relearning the geography of her own soul. The absence of the gnawing, emotional pain was a sensation so novel it was dizzying. She tested her new reality like a tongue probing a missing tooth. She would bring the image of her children to mind, and the love would bloom in her chest, a warm, bittersweet ache, but it no longer ripped her asunder. It was a memory, cherished and painful in the way all lost loves are, but it was no longer an open, weeping wound upon which her entire existence was balanced. The echo in the empty hall. The silence in the grove of forgetfulness was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. Lamia remained there for a time she could not measure, days or perhaps weeks, relearning the geography of her own soul. The absence of the gnawing, emotional pain was a sensation so novel it was dizzying. She tested her new reality like a tongue probing a missing tooth. She would bring the image of her children to mind, and the love would bloom in her chest, a warm, bittersweet ache, but it no longer ripped her asunder. It was a memory, cherished and painful in the way all lost loves are, but it was no longer an open, weeping wound upon which her entire existence was balanced. She discovered another change. The hunger, the terrible physical craving for the life force of children had diminished. It was not gone. The curse's physical manifestation was still woven into her flesh, but it was now a whisper instead of a scream. It was a manageable urge, a dull reminder of what she had been, not a tyrannical force driving her to atrocity. She found she could sate it with the essence of animals, with the primal life energy of the forest itself. The act was still a violation, a predation, but it no longer demanded the ultimate sacrilege. She would never again be the queen of a gilded court, but neither was she doomed to be the child-eating demon of Hera's design. She existed in a new, liminal space. When she finally left the grove, the world seemed different. The colors were not as harsh, the sounds not as jarring. She was still a monster to any who looked upon her, but the monster within had been placated. She began to travel, not as a fugitive fleeing her own pain, but as a wanderer. She avoided the places of men, keeping to the wild, ancient heart of the world, the trackless forests of the north, the misty highlands where centaurs still roamed, the sea-lashed cliffs where only the gulls cried. She was a ghost, but a contented one. She had no destination. The journey itself was the purpose. It was in a high, lonely valley in the Pindus Mountains that she found the ruins. It had once been a small temple, perhaps to a forgotten nymph or a local rustic god. Time and earthquakes had tumbled its columns and split its walls. Ivy and moss claimed the stone, and wildflowers grew in the cracks of the altar. It was a place of quiet decay, a testament to the fact that all things, even the sacred, eventually return to the earth. It felt like a mirror of her own soul, a ruin, but a peaceful one. She made it her sanctuary. The largest remaining chamber, open to the sky, became her home. She would spend her days coiled on the sun-warmed stones, her unblinking eyes watching the clouds drift by. She learned the routines of the creatures that lived there, a family of foxes that denned in the foundation, the hawks that nested in the highest broken wall, the badger that trundled through at dusk. They grew accustomed to her, this great, silent serpent woman who posed them no threat. She was simply part of the landscape. In this self-imposed exile, she had ample time to think. The rage against Hera, which had been a constant, burning coal in her heart, had cooled to embers. It was not forgiveness. Such a concept was meaningless between a mortal and a goddess. It was a form of acceptance. Hera was a force of nature, like an earthquake or a plague. Raging against her was like raging against the storm. It expended energy to no avail. Lamia had transcended the narrative Hera had written for her. She had found a third path, one not of queenly glory or monstrous infamy, but of simple, quiet existence. She was an echo in an empty hall, a sound that persisted long after the source had faded, growing fainter and fainter until it was one with the silence. The shepherd's eyes. Seasons turned in the high valley. Winter came, draping the ruins in a thick blanket of snow, muffling all sound. Lamia, being a creature of a god's curse, did not feel the cold as a mortal would. She watched the snow fall, each flake a unique and perfect design, and found a strange beauty in the world's hibernation. When spring returned, thawing the streams and coaxing green shoots from the earth, a new sound entered her sanctuary. The distant, melodic clanking of sheep bells. A shepherd, a young man with a simple, unlined face and hands calloused from work, had discovered the high pastures. He was brave, or perhaps foolish, to bring his flocks so far from the village. The first time he sallallahu alayhi wasallam her, he froze. His eyes, the color of the summer sky, widened in pure, unadulterated terror. He dropped his staff and made a frantic sign against evil, his lips moving in a silent prayer. Lamia did not move. She did not hiss or bare her fangs. She simply watched him from the shadow of a fallen column, her head tilted in a gesture of calm curiosity. She had learned the power of stillness. The shepherd, seeing that the monster was not attacking, slowly straightened. His fear was still there, a palpable scent on the air, but it was now mixed with a dawning, bewildered curiosity. He looked at her, truly looked, and she saw the moment his perception shifted. He saw the woman's face, the intelligence in the reptilian eyes, the profound, ancient sorrow that seemed to cling to her like mist. He did not speak. He simply retrieved his staff, gave her a slow, cautious nod, and moved his flock to the far end of the valley, giving her ruins a wide berth. He returned the next day, and the next. Each time, he would glance towards the ruins. Sometimes he would see her, sometimes he would not. After a week, he did something extraordinary. He left something for her. It was a small round of fresh goat cheese wrapped in a clean cloth, and a handful of ripe figs, placed carefully on a flat stone at the edge of the ruin. An offering. Lamia watched him go. That evening, she slithered to the stone. The scent of the food was rich and earthy. She had not eaten the gift of a human she could not remember. She tasted the cheese. It was sharp and creamy. The figs were sweet, bursting on her tongue. It was not the life energy she sometimes needed, but it was sustenance of a different kind. It was a gesture. It was a connection. The next day, she was waiting, coiled in a patch of sunlight near the offering stone. The shepherd approached cautiously. He stopped a respectful distance away. "I am called Lycos," he said, his voice rough from disuse and the mountain air. Lamia was silent for a long moment. "Men have called me Lamia," she replied, her voice softer than she had intended. He nodded, as if this confirmed something. "The stories, they say you are a demon." "The stories are not wrong," she said, "but they are not the whole truth." He gathered his courage and took a step closer. "You do not hunt. I have watched you. You let the foxes live. You watch the hawks. You have not touched my sheep." "I have had my fill of taking what is not mine," she said, the words heavy with a history he could only guess at. This became their ritual. He would come with his flock. He would leave an offering. Cheese, fruit, sometimes a skin of rough wine. Sometimes he would speak, telling her simple stories of his life in the village, the stubbornness of his rams, the beauty of a particular sunrise. She, in turn, would rarely speak, but she would listen. She learned of the world of men from this simple, uncomplicated perspective. It was a world of small worries and small joys, a world she had once ruled over from a dizzying height and had now re-entered through a tiny, humble crack. Lycos never asked her about her past. He never asked how she became what she was. He accepted her presence as he accepted the mountain itself. A alam, a fact of the world, sometimes dangerous, sometimes beautiful, always worthy of a cautious respect. In his simple, clear eyes, she was not a myth or a monster. She was just Lamia, the silent woman of the ruins. And in that, she found a form of absolution that no god could ever have granted her. The uninvited guest. The fragile peace of the high valley was shattered by the arrival of a stranger. He was not a shepherd. He was a man from the city, a theros, a state-sponsored observer sent to oracles and sacred sites. His name was Ariston, and he was a man whose mind was a library of myths and portents. He had heard the village whispers about a serpent woman living in the high ruins, and instead of fear, he felt the thrill of discovery. To him, Lamia was not a person. She was a specimen, a living piece of lore to be catalogued and understood. Lycos tried to warn him away. "She wishes to be left alone," the shepherd said, his face earnest with concern. "She is not what the stories say." "Precisely why I must see her," Ariston exclaimed, his eyes alight with a fanatical gleam. "The stories are a corruption. The truth must be recorded. Imagine a first-hand account of the Lamia." He was a small, wiry man, dressed in a traveler's cloak and laden with a writing case containing papyrus scrolls and ink. He ignored Lycos's pleas and climbed the path to the ruins with the single-minded determination of a scholar on the verge of a great revelation. Lamia sensed his approach long before he arrived. The energy he carried was different from Lycos's calm, earthy presence. It was sharp, acquisitive, and intrusive. She retreated into the deepest shadows of the broken temple, hoping he would simply look and leave. But Ariston was not a man to be deterred. He entered the ruin, his eyes scanning the stones eagerly. When he saw her, he did not startle or show fear. He let out a gasp of pure intellectual delight. "Fascinating," he breathed, unrolling a scroll and hastily uncorking his ink. "The hybrid form is consistent with the earliest vase paintings, though the scale coloration is more coppery than described by Pausanias. And the face, remarkable retention of human features, suggesting the transformation was punitive, not natural, which aligns with the Libyan origin myth." He was talking about her as if she were a statue, an artifact. His words, cold and analytical, scraped against the quiet peace she had built. "Leave," Lamia said, her voice a low thrum of warning. "Ah, it speaks," Ariston scribbled furiously. "The voice retains a melodic, educated quality, indicative of a royal upbringing. Tell me, creature, of your origins." "The affair with Zeus. Is it true Hera killed your children herself, or did she employ a proxy? The sources are frustratingly vague." The mention of her children, spoken with such clinical detachment, was a violation. The old, cold anger, which she thought she had buried, stirred. "You tread on ground that will burn you, little man," she hissed, emerging from the shadows. Her full size was intimidating, her coils shifting with a sound like grinding stones. Ariston took a step back, but his enthusiasm was merely tempered with caution, not replaced with fear. "The anger response is predictable, a defense mechanism rooted in profound psychological trauma. Tell me about the hunger. Is it a physical need or a psychosomatic manifestation of your loss?" He was peeling her apart with his words, reducing her tragedy to data points. He was doing what Hera had done, denying her personhood, making her a thing, a story. The peace she had forged, the understanding she had reached with Lycos, felt fragile and naive in the face of this intellectual violation. "Your curiosity is a poison," Lamia snarled, slithering towards him. The air grew cold. The predatory aura she had long suppressed began to radiate from her. The hunger, that dull whisper, began to roar. Not for his life, but for his silence, for the annihilation of his prying, reductive gaze. Ariston finally realized his mistake. The myth was standing before him, not as a subject for study, but as a very real, very dangerous force. The color drained from his face. He dropped his scroll, the inkpot shattering on the stone, a black stain spreading like a curse. "Please," he stammered, holding up his hands. "I meant no harm. I seek only knowledge." "Some knowledge is a light," Lamia said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. and some is a fire that consumes the one who carries it. You sought a monster, now you have found one. She did not kill him, but she showed him what she could be. She let the full force of her centuries of pain and rage, now under her conscious control, wash over him. She showed him in the depths of her unblinking eyes a glimpse of the abyss he so casually wanted to catalog. He saw the dead children. He felt the edge of her hunger. He understood the weight of immortal despair. Ariston screamed. It was not a scream of physical fear, but of psychic disintegration. He turned and fled, scrambling down the mountain path, his mind broken by the truth he had so desperately sought. He would never write his account. He would become a babbling, broken man in his city, a warning to others who would confuse a soul with a story. Lamia watched him go. The ruins were silent again, but the peace was gone. Ariston had reminded her that she could not escape her legend. The world would always seek her out, to fear her, to fight her, or to dissect her. Her sanctuary had been violated. The echo in the empty hall had been heard, and the sound had driven a man to madness. She was still a monster. She had just chosen a different cave. The sting of a reminder. The confrontation with Ariston left a residue, a fine psychic dust that settled over the ruins and over Lamia's spirit. The scholar's flight had been a victory of sorts, a reassertion of her power, but it was a Pyrrhic one. He had, with his invasive curiosity, ripped away the delicate fiction she had been weaving for herself. He had reminded her that the peace of this valley was an illusion, a temporary ceasefire in a war the world at large was still waging against her. Lycos's simple acceptance was a rare and precious anomaly. Ariston's clinical objectification was the rule. In the days that followed, she found herself prowling the perimeter of the ruins, her senses stretched taut, tasting the wind for any new intrusion. The trust she had built with the valley's creatures felt fragile. The foxes were more skittish, the hawks circled higher. They had sensed the shift in her, the reawakening of the predator that lived just beneath the surface of her hard-won tranquility. The hunger, which had been a manageable whisper, now spoke with a clearer, more insistent voice. It was not just for sustenance, but for the assertion of dominance that came with the hunt. Ariston had not just reminded her of her past, he had provoked the monster Hera had made. Lycos noticed the change. When he next came to the valley, he did not approach the offering stone immediately. He stood at a distance, his flock clustering around his legs, and watched her. She was coiled high on a broken section of wall, her body a tense, watchful line against the sky. "He will not return," Lycos said, his voice careful. "The men from the village found him wandering, his mind gone. They say a god struck him for his hubris. They are afraid to come here now." Lamia turned her head slowly, her yellow slitted eyes fixing on him. "No god struck him. I did. Not with a lightning bolt, but with a memory. He wanted to know what I was. I showed him." Lycos swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He had always known what she was, of course, but he had chosen to see the person first. Now he was being forced to look at the myth. He was a fool. He disturbed your peace. "There is no peace for me, shepherd," she replied, her voice flat and weary. "Only pauses. This," she gestured with a claw to encompass the ruins and the valley, "was a pause. He was a reminder that the story continues outside this place, that my curse is not a private sorrow, but a public legend. And legends have a hunger of their own. She slid down from the wall, her scales scraping against the stone. The movement was fluid and powerful, a display of the latent strength she usually kept suppressed. Lycos took an involuntary step back. The instinct was small, almost polite, but she sallowed it. The fracture was there. "You fear me now," she stated. It was not an accusation, merely an observation. "I respect you," he corrected, though his eyes betrayed his unease. "I have always respected you. But I see now that I was a fool too. I thought you were just a woman who had been wronged. I forgot the power that wrong had created." "They are the same thing," Lamia said, coming to a stop before him. She did not loom, but her presence was immense. The woman and the power, the love and the hunger. You cannot have one without the other. You accepted the woman, Lycos. Can you accept the power, the things I have done, the things I may yet do to protect this pause?" He had no answer. He looked at her, at the beautiful, tragic face and the terrifying body, at the intelligence in her eyes and the sharpness of her claws. He saw the whole terrible picture. And he was just a shepherd. The weight of it was too much. He nodded, a slow, sad gesture, then turned and gathered his flock, leading them back down the mountain path without leaving an offering. He did not look back. Lamia watched him go. The sting of his withdrawal was surprisingly sharp. It was a different kind of loss, quieter than the cataclysm that had taken her children, but it was a loss nonetheless. It was the loss of a possibility. The chance that a mortal could look upon her and see something other than a monster or a myth had been extinguished. Ariston, with his scrolls and his ink, had not just broken his own mind, he had broken the fragile bridge Lamia had built to the world of men. She was alone again, but this time the solitude was a conscious choice. The world had reminded her of what she was, and she would not make the mistake of forgetting again. The wandering years reclaimed. The high valley, once a sanctuary, was now a cage whose bars were made of memory and expectation. The silence felt accusatory. The wind whispering through the ruins seemed to carry Ariston's frantic questions and Lycos's disappointed silence. Lamia knew she could not stay. The peace she had found here had been contingent on forgetting the world, and the world had forcefully remembered her. She left before the next sunrise, sliding away from the ruins without a backward glance. She moved south and east, away from the heart of Greece, towards the coast. Her journey was different now. Before, she had been a creature of pure reaction, driven by hunger or fleeing her pain. Now she moved with a grim purpose. She was not running from something, but towards a new understanding of herself. She was embracing the identity the world had forced upon her. Lamia, the eternal, the monster. She did not hide. She traveled by night, yes, but she made no great effort to conceal her passage. Let the villagers catch a glimpse of her sinuous form in the moonlight. Let the stories grow. She was a fact of their world, a piece of living geology, and she would no longer apologize for her existence. The diminished hunger was now a tool she wielded with precision. She would take a goat from a hillside flock, feeling the brief surge of life energy, a transaction between predator and prey, clean and without the terrible psychological weight of her former feasts. She was sating the curse on her own terms. She found a new home in a network of sea caves on a desolate stretch of the Anatolian coast. The caves were vast, cathedral-like spaces carved by the relentless sea, their walls slick with moisture, their floors a mosaic of smooth, wave-tumbled stones. The thunder of the surf was a constant, roaring companion that drowned out the whispers of the past. Here, she was not a queen or a pitiable wretch. She was simply a powerful creature in a powerful place. She began to explore the limits of her own nature. She spent days in the tidal pools, observing the ruthless efficiency of the anemones and the octopuses. She learned to swim, her powerful coils propelling her through the cold, clear water with a grace she had never known on land. She hunted fish and seabirds, honing her instincts, reclaiming her body not as a prison but as an instrument. The act of removing her eyes, the gift of Hermes, became less a desperate escape and more a meditative practice. In the absolute darkness of the caves, with only the sound and smell and feel of the ocean around her, she would find a center of calm, a core of self that was separate from both the queen and the demon. It was during this time that she had her last direct encounter with the divine. She was perched on a high rock, watching a storm rage over the sea, the lightning fracturing the sky. The air crackled with power. A figure emerged from the lashing rain, walking upon the waves as if they were solid ground. It was not Zeus, nor Hera, nor Hermes. It was Poseidon, the earth-shaker, his beard foaming with sea spray, his eyes the color of the deep abyss. He regarded her for a long moment, his trident glowing with a faint blue light. "You occupy my caves, creature." His voice was the grinding of continental plates. Lamia did not cower. She met his gaze. "They were empty. I harm none of your subjects, Lord of the Seas. I take only what I need from the shore." Poseidon's stern expression did not change, but a flicker of something, not approval, but acknowledgement, passed through his deep-set eyes. "You are not like the other nuisances the Olympians create. You do not wail or seek revenge. You simply are." "What is there to seek?" Lamia replied, the wind whipping her hair around her face. "Revenge is a wheel that turns on itself. I have stepped off the wheel." Poseidon considered this. The gods were beings of passion and action. The concept of renunciation was alien to them. "Hera will not be pleased to know you have found a measure of contentment." "Hera's pleasure or displeasure is no longer a compass for my life," Lamia said, and the truth of the statement resonated in her very bones. A slow smile, as unpredictable and dangerous as a riptide, spread across Poseidon's face. Good. It was a single word, laden with meaning. In the complex, petty politics of Olympus, any thorn in Hera's side was a point of interest for her divine rivals. Her existence, her quiet defiance, was an amusement to him. With a final, crashing roar of the waves, he turned and vanished back into the heart of the storm. Lamia was left alone, the salt spray stinging her skin. The encounter was not a blessing, but it was a recognition of a new kind of power. She was not a pawn anymore. She was a piece on the board that had moved itself, and the players had taken note. The wandering years were over. She had reclaimed her narrative. She was Lamia, who had looked into the abyss of her own soul and had not flinched. And in the roaring darkness of the sea, she had finally found a voice that was entirely her own. The seed of a new legend. Centuries are long, even for an immortal. Lamia's existence settled into a rhythm as timeless as the tides that carved her home. The world outside changed. Empires rose and fell. The glory of Athens faded. The legions of Alexander marched. With a final, crashing roar of the waves, he turned and vanished back into the heart of the storm. Lamia was left alone, the salt spray stinging her skin. The encounter was not a blessing, but it was a recognition of a new kind of power. She was not a pawn anymore. She was a piece on the board that had moved itself, and the players had taken note. The wandering years were over. She had reclaimed her narrative. She was Lamia, who had looked into the abyss of her own soul and had not flinched. And in the roaring darkness of the sea, she had finally found a voice that was entirely her own. The seed of a new legend. Centuries are long, even for an immortal. Lamia's existence settled into a rhythm as timeless as the tides that carved her home. The world outside changed. Empires rose and fell. The glory of Athens faded. The legions of Alexander marched and his empire splintered. The Republic of Rome hardened into an empire that bestrode the known world. The old gods, once vibrant and immediate forces, began to recede, their worship becoming a matter of state ritual and philosophy rather than living faith. Their power waned, and the monsters they had spawned became more myth than memory. Lamia felt this shift. The air itself grew thinner on divine energy. The occasional tremor of Olympian power that once vibrated through the world became a rare and distant echo. She was a relic, a living fossil from an age of more passionate, more terrible wonders. She continued her solitary life in the sea caves, her interactions with the world limited to the occasional fisherman who would glimpse her from afar and cross himself, muttering about a local sea spirit or a strange large seal. Her legend had fragmented and localized, diluted by time. It was during this long, quiet autumn of the gods that a new sound came to her caves. The cry of a child. It was not the cry of an infant, but of a boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. His small fishing boat had been dashed against the rocks in a sudden squall. He was clinging to a piece of wreckage, his small body battered by the waves, his cries growing weaker. Lamia watched from the darkness of her cave. The old instinct, the curse-born hunger, stirred faintly. But it was a ghost of its former self, easily dismissed. A stronger, older instinct took hold. The one that had made her a queen who protected her people. The one that had made her a mother. She had not felt its pure, untainted pull in over a millennium. She slid into the water. The boy's eyes were wide with terror as he saw the great serpentine form cutting through the waves towards him. He screamed, a thin, reedy sound lost in the wind. "Be still," Lamia commanded, her voice somehow carrying over the storm. She did not touch him with her claws. Instead, she used her powerful body to create a calmer eddy in the water around him, then gently nudged the piece of wreckage towards a small, sheltered cove he could never have reached on his own. She guided him to safety, a silent, monstrous guardian against the sea's wrath. When his feet touched solid ground, he scrambled onto the beach, coughing up seawater. He turned to look at her, his fear now mixed with a confusion that bordered on awe. She remained in the shallows, only her head and torso visible, the rain plastering her hair to her skin. You saved me," the boy stammered. Lamia said nothing. She simply watched him. "The priest says there are demons in these caves," the boy continued, his childish logic trying to reconcile the story with the reality. "But demons don't save people." "Perhaps the priest does not know all the stories," Lamia replied softly. "What are you?" he asked, his curiosity overcoming his fear. She considered the question. Queen? Lover? Mother? Monster? Survivor? "I am Lamia," she said simply. It was the first time she had spoken her name to a mortal in centuries. It was no longer a confession or a threat. It was just a name. The boy stared for a moment longer. Then, with the resilience of the young, he nodded, turned, and ran up the beach towards the path that led to his village. Lamia returned to her cave. She knew what would happen. The boy would tell his story. He would speak of a sea woman, part serpent, who had saved him from the storm. At first, they would not believe him. Then, as his story remained consistent, they would. They would weave a new legend around her, different from the old, terrifying one. She would become a local guardian spirit, a protectress of sailors and lost children. They might leave offerings of fish and wine at the mouth of the cave. They would call her by name, but the name would no longer mean child eater. It would mean the one who watches the coast. She had spent lifetimes defined by a curse born from a god's jealousy. Now, in the twilight of those gods, she had the chance to define herself. The seed of a new legend had been planted, not by a divine decree, but by a simple, human act of compassion. The cycle of horror Hera had begun was finally, truly breaking. Lamia, the Eternal, was being reborn, not through magic or sacrifice, but through the slow, patient work of time and a single saved life. The end of her story was not a death, but a transformation. She was becoming a part of the world's folklore, a kinder, gentler myth for a new age. And, in the deep, resonant silence of her cave, she found that this was an ending she could accept. The tides of mortal memory. The boy, whose name was Kairos, did indeed tell his story. It spread through the small coastal village of Skapasti, not like a wildfire, but like a slow, creeping vine. Initially met with scoffing disbelief, then with wary curiosity, and finally with a kind of superstitious acceptance. The village elder, a grizzled old fisherman named Theron, who had lost a brother to the sea, was the first to venture back to the cove. He did not see Lamia, but he left a small, painted clay jug of wine and a loaf of coarse barley bread on a flat rock at the high tide line, a gesture of thanks for the boy's life. Lamia observed this from the shadows of her cave. The offering was not for the hunger, which was a dull, almost forgotten echo, but for something else, a nascent, fragile connection. She did not take the food, letting the waves eventually claim it, but its presence was a message. The world was not shouting her name in terror, it was whispering it in gratitude. This pattern repeated. A fisherman, caught in a sudden fog, would swear a great coppery shape had moved beneath his boat, guiding him away from a submerged reef. A young girl, chasing a runaway chicken too close to the cliffs, would be found unharmed, babbling about a lady in the water who had gently herded her back to the path with a soft hiss. The stories multiplied, each one sanding down the sharp, terrifying edges of her ancient legend. The name Lamia ceased to be a curse word and became a local talisman. Mothers would tell their children, "Do not fear the dark waves, for the Lady of the Coves watches over Skapasti." Lamia found herself in a role she had never envisioned, a guardian. It was an odd, passive form of sovereignty, a far cry from the active rule of Libya. She did not dispense justice or lead armies. She simply was, a permanent, watchful feature of the landscape, and her presence imposed a kind of order. Pirates and slavers, hearing the local tales of a protective sea demon, gave the coast of Skapasti a wide berth. The village, as a result, prospered in a quiet, unassuming way. She never showed herself fully to them. She was a glimpse of a scaled back in the water, a pair of unblinking, luminous eyes in the cave's darkness, a whisper on the wind. This partial visibility was crucial. It allowed the villagers to project their own needs onto her, to shape her into the kind of deity they required. They called her Heliotrophos, the sea-nourished one, and built a small, simple shrine at the entrance to the largest cave. A niche in the rock holding a perpetually burning oil lamp and a few worn, sea-smooth stones that had become objects of reverence. This new existence was not without its melancholy. Watching the villagers from the shadows, she saw Lamia the full, vibrant, and fleeting cycle of mortal life. She saw Lamia Kairos grow into a man, take a wife, and have children of his own. She saw Lamia Theron the Elder pass away, his funeral boat set alight and pushed out to sea in a tradition older than Rome. She saw Lamia generations be born, live, and die within the span of her single, unending awareness. Their lives were like the brief, brilliant flares of phosphorescence in the night sea, beautiful, intense, and gone in a moment. Their faith in her was a humble thing, rooted in the practicalities of survival, and it was far more meaningful to her than the fearful prayers that had once been offered to the distant, capricious Olympians. She was not worshipped out of terror, but out of a relationship, however distant. She had become a part of their story, and they, in turn, had given her a new chapter in her own. The Scholar from Rome. The peace of Scipasti was eventually pierced by the outside world, not in the form of a hero or a god, but of an empire. A Roman galley, sleek and low in the water, its banks of oars moving with a mechanical, insect-like rhythm, dropped anchor in the bay. From it disembarked a small party led by a man named Lucius Vorenus. He was not a soldier, but a scholar and a bureaucrat, part of the vast imperial machine that catalogued, taxed, and assimilated the cultures it conquered. He had heard the local tales of the sea Lamia, and, being a man educated in the Greek classics, he was intensely intrigued. He was a contrast to the frantic Ariston of centuries past. Lucius was calm, methodical, and possessed the unshakable confidence of a citizen of the world's greatest power. He interviewed the villagers with polite, relentless efficiency, recording their stories on wax tablets. He examined the humble shrine, making careful notes on its construction and the offerings. He then, accompanied by 2 nervous legionaries, announced his intention to enter the primary sea cave. Lamia watched his approach from within. This man did not carry the scent of divine curiosity or heroic ambition. He carried the smell of papyrus, ink, and cold imperial authority. He was here to file a report to fit her into a Roman taxonomic box. Lucius entered the cave holding a lantern high. The light played over the glistening walls and the dark, still pools. He, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, her then, coiled around a great central rock, her form half in shadow, half in the flickering lamplight. The legionaries gripped their gladii, their faces pale. Lucius, however, merely adjusted his tunic and cleared his throat. "Greetings," he said, his Latin accent crisp and formal. "I am Lucius Vorenus, on assignment from the proconsul of Macedonia. I have come to inquire about the entity known to the locals as Haliothropos, and identified in the historical record as Lamia." Lamia remained silent, her unblinking gaze fixed on him. The silence stretched, becoming heavy and uncomfortable. One of the legionaries made a warning sign with his hand. "I am aware of the traditional narratives surrounding your person," Lucius continued, undeterred. "The affair with Jupiter, the vengeance of Juno, the unfortunate dietary habits. I must say, the local accounts present a significant deviation from the canonical texts. My purpose is to ascertain the facts for the imperial archives." "Facts," Lamia repeated, the word a dry rustle in the cavern. "You Romans believe you can own facts like you own land." "It is the duty of Rome to bring order to the world," Lucius stated, as if reciting from a manual. "That includes ordering knowledge. Are you, or are you not, the Lamia who was queen of Libya? I was. And the stories of your progeny and their fate? True. And your subsequent actions? The predation upon children? That was also true, Lamia admitted, the old shame a distant, muted chord. For a time. Lucius made a note on his tablet. Fascinating. And the transition to a beneficent entity. What prompted this reformation? Lamia shifted her great coils, the sound echoing through the cave. The legionaries flinched. Reformation, is that what you call it? I did not reform. I endured. The world changed around me. The gods who made me faded. The pain they inflicted, eventually it lost its sharpness. I simply outlived my own legend. Lucius looked up from his tablet, his scholarly detachment giving way to a flicker of genuine intellectual wonder. You are suggesting that myth itself is malleable? That it is subject to the erosion of time and the reinterpretation of its witnesses? I am suggesting, Lamia said, her voice gaining a subtle, powerful intensity, that you are a brief flicker of light. I am the darkness that was here before you and will be here after. You can write your reports, Lucius of Rome. You can categorize me, define me, and file me away in your archives. But your empire will one day be dust, and your language forgotten, and I will still be here, in this cave, listening to the sea. Your facts are a story you are telling yourselves. My story is written in stone and water. Lucius stared at her, his pen hovering over the wax. For the first time, he looked not at a subject of study, but at a scale of time that dwarfed his own civilization's grandeur. The confidence of Rome seemed a small, fragile thing in the face of such antiquity. He slowly closed his tablet. Some things, he said quietly, perhaps do not belong in an archive. He gave a short, respectful bow of his head. Lady of the Coves, the proconsul will be told that the local tales are unverified folklore. You have my word. He turned and led the stunned legionaries out of the cave. Lamia watched him go. She had not threatened him. She had not needed to. She had simply stated the truth of her existence, and the weight of it had been enough to crush his imperial certainty. Rome, for all its power, was just another mortal construct, and she was Lamia, eternal. The fading of the gods' scars. With the passing of the Roman scholar, a final, profound quiet settled over Lamia's existence. The encounter had been a punctuation mark, a definitive statement that closed the book on the era of gods and heroes. The world was growing older, colder, and more rational. The great, churning passions of Olympus were now the stuff of poetry and theater, their power diluted into metaphor. Lamia could feel their absence in the very fabric of the world, a silence where once there had been a constant, chaotic symphony of divine will. In this new silence, she began to notice a change within herself. It was subtle at first, a faint itching sensation along the line where her human skin met her serpentine scales. Over the decades, it became more pronounced. The scales themselves, once a hard, coppery armor, began to lose their metallic luster, becoming softer, more pliable. The sharp obsidian claws at the tips of her fingers grew brittle and slowly, over the course of a century, wore down to thick, rounded nails. The most significant change was in her eyes. The curse of Hera, the foundational stone of her torment, was weakening. She found that she could, for the first time in nearly 2 millennia, close them. The first time she voluntarily lowered her eyelids, the sensation was so shocking, so profoundly relieving, that she wept for a day and a night. The ghosts of her children were still there in her memory, cherished and loved, but they were no longer burned onto her retinas. She could grant herself the gift of darkness, of true, natural sleep. The monstrous form, a divine punishment wrought by a queen of the gods, was unraveling because the power that had sustained it was fading from the world. Hera's attention was elsewhere, her influence waning, as belief in her dwindled. The curse was like a tattoo etched in divine ink, and the body of the world was slowly metabolizing it. She was not becoming human again. That was impossible. The past could not be so cleanly erased. But she was becoming something else, something natural. The forced fusion of woman and serpent was softening into a more harmonious, if still strange, integration. She was becoming a creature of this new post-Olympian world, a unique being, the last of her kind, slowly being reclaimed by the earth that had witnessed her entire saga. She spent less time in the deep sea caves and more time on the rocky headlands, basking in the sun like the great lizards that lived there. The villagers of Skapasti, now many generations removed from Kairos, still maintained the shrine. To them, she was no longer a transformed queen or a demon, but simply the spirit of the headland, an eternal, benign presence, as much a part of the landscape as the wind and the waves. They would see her sometimes, a distant, graceful figure on the cliffs, and would simply nod and go about their work. She was their protector, and that was all that mattered. The intricate, bloody tapestry of her origin was unknown to them, and she preferred it that way. Let the old stories die. They had caused enough pain. The last memory of Libya. One evening, as the sun set the sea on fire, a strange ship arrived at Skapasti. It was not a trader nor a fisherman, but a small, elegant vessel from Alexandria, its sails emblazoned with scholarly symbols. A single passenger disembarked, an elderly, frail man aided by 2 attendants. He was a historian and geographer, the last students of the great library of Alexandria, which itself was a fading memory. His name was Philo, and he had spent his life collecting the scattered fragments of the ancient world. He had come because of a single, obscure reference in a crumbling scroll. A mention of a serpent guardian on this specific stretch of coast, a creature that local tradition called Lamia. Unlike Lucius the Roman, Philo was not here to categorize, but to preserve. He knew the old stories were dying, and he was a collector of dying things. He was brought to the headland where Lamia now spent most of her days. She saw him approach, a tiny, determined figure leaning heavily on a staff. He did not speak at first. He simply stood before her, his old, clouded eyes taking her in. The softened scales, the human-like face, the posture of immense age and peace. He did not ask if she was Lamia. He simply began to speak, his voice a thin, reedy whisper, reciting a poem in a dialect of Greek that had not been spoken for 1,000 years. It was a hymn to the beauty of Cyrene, describing its white palaces, its hanging gardens, the wisdom of its queen. Lamia listened, stunned. The words were a key, unlocking a door in her mind she had sealed shut. She saw it all again, not with pain, but with a poignant, breathtaking clarity. The scent of jasmine, the weight of the gold diadem on her brow, the sound of her children's laughter echoing in the sun-drenched courtyard. It was the Libya of her youth, of her life, before the gods had torn it all away. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of remembrance, not of grief. When Philo finished, there was a long silence. "I thought someone should remember," the old man said softly. not the monster, the queen. Lamia looked at him, this frail keeper of lost things. "Thank you," she said, and the words were inadequate for the gift he had given her. He had not unearthed her pain, he had returned to her a piece of her soul. Philo smiled a gentle, sad smile. He bowed his head, then turned and allowed his attendants to lead him back to his ship. He died on the return journey to Alexandria, but the scroll containing the hymn to Cyrene survived in his personal effects. Lamia watched his ship disappear over the horizon. She had her past back, whole and complex and beautiful. It was no longer a weapon used against her, or a shadow that haunted her. It was simply her story. She was Lamia, queen of Libya, mother of Lysandra, Alexios, and Demetrius. She was also the monster of the myths, the survivor of the grove, the lady of the coves. Every part was true. Every part was her. The reconciliation was now complete. One with the headland. The final years, if they could be called that, were a slow, gentle merging. Lamia's form continued to change. The distinction between woman and serpent blurred until it was meaningless. She became a being of elegant, elongated grace, her skin possessing the texture of sea-worn stone, her hair like long, flowing kelp. She moved less and less, often remaining in a single, comfortable hollow on the highest point of the headland for years at a time, her body becoming a part of the landscape. Seabirds nested in the folds of her still form, mistaking her for rock. Ivy crept over her limbs. She did not mind. It was a return. She watched the world continue its turn. Scapasti endured, a small, resilient thread in the tapestry of history. New religions rose, their bells and chants carried on the wind, speaking of a single God of love and sacrifice. She listened to these new stories with a detached interest. They were, like all the others, an attempt to make sense of the world. She held no animosity for them. They were just another season. Her consciousness, once a sharp, painful point of awareness, began to expand and soften. Her thoughts were less of herself and more of the sea below, the sky above, the stone beneath. The memory of her children was a warm, golden light in her mind, a cherished dream from long ago. The hunger was a forgotten word. The curse was a whisper from a closed room. One day, a great storm gathered, one of the fiercest in living memory. The villagers of Scapasti battened down their shutters and prayed to their new god for deliverance. The waves crashed against the headland with titanic force. A single, monumental bolt of lightning struck the highest rock. When the storm cleared and the villagers ventured out, they saw that the familiar, graceful form on the headland was gone. In its place was a new, striking rock formation, one that looked eerily like a woman of stone, gazing eternally out to sea, her form both human and serpentine, wrapped in stone ivy and crowned with nesting gulls. They understood. The spirit of the headland had not left them. She had simply become one with the land she had protected for so long. The story of the child-eating demon was a forgotten myth from a savage age. The story of the guardian of Scapasti, however, was now written in the very stone and sea of the place. It was a legend that would last us long as the headland itself. Lamia's journey was over. The pain, the rage, the love, the loss, it had all flowed through her and finally flowed out. She had endured the gods, outlived empires, and transcended her own myth. In the end, she found the peace that Hera could never take from her, The peace of becoming a story not of horror, but of place, not of a curse, but of a quiet, enduring guardianship. She was memory. She was stone. She was home.